the Methodist Church in Britain in a nutshell. Methodist preaching started in the 18th century, the 1700s, and John Wesley going around small rural communities preaching the gospel. In 1791, John Wesley dies. There are about 58,000 Methodists in the UK. And then after he dies, Britain changes dramatically. It becomes far more industrialised. The Industrial Revolution happens and Britain is changed forever. Communities are changed, they become less rural, and people's lives are changed. In the mid-1800s, Methodism explodes. The amount of Methodists increases to about 1.5 million, much greater than the 58,000 that were there when Wesley dies. There are two key reasons for this. Firstly, the established church, the Anglican church, wasn't meeting the needs of the people. It wasn't speaking to them. The gentry were quite happy with it, and people saw it as a church for the gentry, with the royal family at the head of it, and with some of the division within church buildings itself, but also the church failing to recognise the problems of the poor, the problems of children, the problems for everyday people in an industrialised Britain. Meanwhile, Methodist preachers are going around the country, spreading the good news to the everyday man, wherever the everyday man may be, in the town centres, in the fields, but also now in Methodist communities that are popping up and growing. And these Methodist communities are doing things like providing education through Sunday school. They're helping to feed the poor. They're banning alcohol in places because of the problem of alcoholism in the country, and wages being spent in the bars and not getting to the families. The Methodist Church is very conscious of its community and how God speaks into that, and it appeals and it grows. And so we see Methodist communities pop up all over Great Britain and Ireland. And here's a map representing that a little bit. But these Methodist societies are all a little bit different. They're not all under the same banner. Some are Wesleyan, some are primitive, some have slightly different theology, some really uphold John Wesley, some barely mention the guy. So in 1932, things change. And the Methodist Church is brought under one banner. This is known as the Connection, and it still exists now. And it's the idea that all of the churches in Great Britain and Northern Ireland are in some way connected, that we are responsible for one another, and that we share our resources with one another. This is what the Methodist website says about what a connection is and the connection. Methodists belong to local churches or ecumenical partnerships, but also feel part of a larger connected community, the connection. This sense of being connected makes a difference to how the Methodist Church as a whole is structured. At its heart is an understanding of the Christian community as the body of Christ. Just as a human body contains different limbs and organs that depend on each other, so we should be close and caring enough to feel each other's pain and delight. We should put the good of the whole body before our own individual needs. The promise of mutual support is a strength of Methodism. If you become a member of the Methodist Church, a pastoral visitor is responsible for visiting you and offering spiritual support, encouragement and challenge. In the Methodist Church, decisions are made as openly as possible, giving opportunities for all to contribute. It is important for all views to be heard and taken seriously, especially where Christians disagree. And so the church started to work together to share its resources, recognising that connectedness. And some of the examples of resources that are shared across the connection are the Methodist Prayer Handbook, which is available to anybody who wants it and can help us with daily prayers, so that we can link in together and pray for the same things and the same places as a church. There's also the Singing the Faith hymn book, a way of understanding our theology through song, making sure that we aren't singing things that are theologically incorrect or at least against Methodist doctrine, and a good way of also recognising what the hymns and the songs that are popular within Methodism are, so that we can be worshipping together even when we're worshipping apart. There's the Methodist website, which contains numerous resources. There are Bible studies, there are things for Lent and Christmas, as well as information on what Methodism does and how Methodism works. You can even find minutes of most big meetings there, and you can find our CPD, our set of rules of how to act as a Methodist church. We share our money. This tends to be done through assessments, and our properties as well. All properties belong to the Methodist connection as a whole, rather than to the individual churches and circuits. And then when the Methodist properties are sold, if they have closed, that money is split between circuit and connection. We share in the training of ordained ministers. Our ministers are now trained at Queen's College in Birmingham, and some of the money that we share goes towards that training of ministers. And then, of course, we share the ministers themselves, with ministers moving around and working in different parts of the country and with different churches. And we do the same with local preachers, although on a smaller scale. But our local preachers are equally trained with the Methodist Church Training Programme, and they are shared amongst the churches. They don't only preach in their own church. So that's just some examples of many examples of how our sharing of resources within Connection works, and some of the ways that it may affect us, and you may see how it affects us. This connection also helps define our theology and our calling, and this is the Methodist calling. This is what the church exists for as far as the Methodist Church is concerned. The church exists to increase awareness of God's presence and to celebrate God's love, and it does this through worship in various different forms and ways. We may traditionally think of worship as our Sunday morning service, but the Methodist Church acknowledges various types of worship happening throughout the week that increase the awareness of God's presence and celebrate God's love. There's learning and caring. The church exists to help people to grow and learn as Christians through mutual support and care. This something we do together in small groups, something that we do in bigger groups through sermons and preaching. This is one of the key things about Methodism, and to be fair, most churches, the learning and growing as Christians and helping one another to grow as Christians. Third part of our calling is service. The church exists to be a good neighbour to people in need and to challenge injustice. And I would say justice has been a key part of Methodism throughout its history. It's one of the things that really drove it, is its work for the poor, its work for the maligned, its work for those who didn't have good rights in the workplace, its work with educating people and making sure children got education. Justice has been key to the Methodist Church's work and mission throughout its history. It's one of the major things that defines us as a church, is the way we talk and we work at our justice. And yes, absolutely, other churches also look to challenge injustice and do good things in its community. But this is at the very heart of what it is to be Methodist. and evangelism. The church exists to make more followers of Jesus Christ. We hear Jesus' call of making more disciples, and so work to evangelize and spread the good news of Jesus. So, 1932, the Methodist Connection works to fulfill its calling by working together and sharing its resources. But equally, it's 1932. The sharing of resources is not as easy as it is now, with not the technological advances that we have. So the Methodist Church creates a unique system where the groups are made smaller, still as one big connection, but with smaller groups within that. So we're split by area into districts, and you'll see there are the list of districts. We're in number 20 in the Newcastle district. Now you may notice those numbers are in a strange order. There are some numbers missing. That's where districts have been combined to become bigger districts. A good example is the Scotland district. Scotland is now one district as a whole, apart from the Shetland Islands. And you've got the North West district there, number 1, and also the Wales district. Most of Wales is in one district also. This has happened for two reasons. One is the sharing of resources is easier now than it was in 1932 when these districts were designed, but also because there has been a decline in our numbers, and therefore it's been hard to have smaller districts, and therefore we've had to combine districts across Methodism. And we see the same thing happening as we get to circuits. Now this is the current Tyndale Methodist circuit. Now that is a combination of, I think, maybe 4 different circuits, certainly 3 different circuits. And this area has, in its history, had 81 different chapels in it, and there they all are dotted about. But things look a little different now. We now have 17 churches in this area. If you're wondering where Hexham Trinity is, it's under Hexham West End. You can see it if you zoom into the map on the Tyndale website, but if I zoomed in, then I lost some of the churches off the edge. So there are 17 there in this area, very different from the 81 that we have had in this area. So that's circuit level, and then we come down obviously to our local church level, each local church. Now in all of these levels there are ways for the people of the church to have a voice, and so I'm just going to go through that quickly, starting with local church and the church council. Now those of you who have seen Vicar of Dibley may recognise this image. It's the local people of the church meeting with the vicar to discuss the matters of the church. And that is what our church councils are effectively. Often they look bigger than this. In fact, they have to look bigger than this by rules. You have to have at least 12 members of church council. And we meet together to discuss the life of the church. Moving out from that, we come back to circuit, where representatives from each of the churches meet together once a quarter to discuss circuit policy and circuit budget and different ways forward to work together and share those resources and those ideas. This is also where we decide how many ministers we as a circuit will have and approve various things brought by the circuit leadership team, a team made up of various people from the churches and all the ministers who look to lead the circuit, or at least propose ideas to the circuit for the circuit to either take on and approve or to reject and come back with other ideas. Then as a circuit, we send people from the circuit meeting as our representatives to what's called district synod, where we meet together. The meetings are chaired by the chair of district, who is currently the Reverend John Assaul, and we go through the policies brought down from conference for us to, as churches, to recognise organise. We go through the circuit budget, and we also have some teaching and some training to take back to our churches, as well as worshipping together. And then our largest group is the Methodist Conference, where each district sends representatives to be part of a meeting of the whole connection, representing the whole connection as best as possible. They meet once a year and approve various rules and policy changes. There is the place where ministers are ordained by the Methodist Church, and it's a place where we discuss and debate big topics and big elements of theology where there may be some disagreement. Now, at all of these levels, you are able to have a voice, to be a part of. You can firstly find out what is said at these meetings. Minutes are largely taken and available, and if you really want to know the minutes of certain meetings, you can request them. Or if you want minutes of the conference or the Methodist Council, which we haven't discussed, but that does the day-to-day work of the conference, you can get the minutes for that. Equally, you can watch the Methodist Conference as it's happening, or even after it's happening, via YouTube and through the website. And you can be elected to all of these groups, or some of these groups. If you wish to be on church council, speak to your minister. If you wish to go to circuit meeting, also speak to your minister. Representatives at district synod are always welcome, and so speak to your minister about that, or your superintendent about that. If you would like to go to conference, then you first need to go to district synod. But there is a place for people to be involved in the structure of the Methodist Church and to have a voice. What's really important is that actually at none of these meetings the ministerial staff outweigh the laity, the members of the church. There has to be at least 50-50 at every level, but at most levels there tends to be more laity, more members of the church present and having their voice heard than there are ministerial staff. So it's taken me about 20 minutes. Well done if you've stayed to the end, but hopefully that's explained Methodism to you. Now, I recognise this may not be the most inspiring piece of media I have put out as a minister, and frankly I wouldn't watch it all, but hopefully it has helped to explain a bit about how the structures of Methodism worked. And if you have found it interesting and you do want to dive a bit deeper into it and find out further how it works, you can either ask your minister. If you want further details, I particularly recommend the superintendent. She would love to talk to you about it. Or you can look at the Methodist website, methodist.org.uk, or just scan the QR code there and hopefully that will take you to it as well. But otherwise, I hope that's explained as best as possible what you might want to or might feel you need to know.